Jacob shuffled through the nightly routine. He was a man of simple habits, even more so after Eleanor's passing. He locked the workshop, the smell of coal dust and iron clinging to him like a shroud. Duke, his loyal German shepherd, padded beside him, a comforting presence in the growing darkness. Inside the house, silence pressed in. The grandfather clock ticked, each second a hammer blow to his heart. He missed Eleanor. He missed her laughter. He heated some broth, the steam a poor substitute for the aroma of her cooking. Duke whined, nudging his hand. "I miss her too, boy," Jacob muttered, scratching behind Duke's ears. Dinner was a silent affair, the clink of the spoon against the bowl jarring in the stillness. Later, as he climbed the stairs, each creak sounded unnaturally loud. He checked Elena's sewing room as he did every night. The door was slightly ajar. He hadn't left it that way. A shiver snaked down his spine. He pushed the door open, heart pounding. Moonlight spilled through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The rocking chair creaked back and forth as if propelled by an unseen hand. Jacob froze, his breath catching in his throat. He backed out slowly, pulling the door shut. He told himself it was the wind, but deep down a seed of unease had been planted. Sleep was a fickle mistress that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves against the window pane sent a jolt of fear through Jacob. Duke, sensing his unease, stayed close, his warm body a comfort against the cold dread seeping into Jacob's bones. He tossed and turned, images of Eleanor flashing behind his eyelids, her smile now a painful reminder of his loss. The estate was his only world now. Nestled amidst rolling hills and whispering willows, Willow Creek had been their sanctuary. He and Eleanor had poured their love into the land, nurturing its orchards and tending its gardens. Duke had been their faithful companion, patrolling the grounds with unwavering loyalty. Now the silence of the house was deafening. The laughter that once filled its rooms was gone, replaced by a haunting emptiness. He rose before dawn, his body stiff, his mind weary. Duke greeted him with a wagging tail, his brown eyes full of concern. Jacob forced a smile, patting the dog's head. "Let's check on the horses," he said, his voice gruff with unshed tears. The crisp morning air did little to dispel the unease that clung to him like a morning fog. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. Days turned into weeks, each one a struggle against the suffocating grief that threatened to consume Jacob. He threw himself into his work, the rhythmic clang of the hammer a temporary reprieve from the silence of the house. But even in the heat of the forge, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sensation of a presence lurking just beyond his sight. One evening, as he was closing up the workshop, he saw it again. A fleeting shadow, a flicker of movement in the corner of his eye. He whirled around, heart pounding. The workshop was empty. He chided himself for his jumpiness, blaming it on exhaustion. But as he turned to leave, he saw it. A faint indentation on Elena's favorite armchair, the one she always sat in when she visited him in the workshop. It was as if someone had just been sitting there. Fear tightened its grip on his chest. He stumbled back, knocking over a bucket of nails. The clatter echoed in the silence, amplifying his fear. He fled the workshop, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Duke met him at the door, barking in alarm. Jacob knelt, burying his face in the dog's thick fur, seeking solace in his warmth. "I'm going crazy, boy," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I must be going crazy." The strange occurrences continued. He would wake in the night to the scent of lavender, Elena's favorite fragrance lingering in the air. Lights flickered, bulbs blowing out with a startling pop. Objects moved, disappearing from their places only to reappear in the most unexpected locations. Jacob tried to rationalize it all, blaming faulty wiring, drafts, his own grief-stricken mind playing tricks on him. But deep down he knew better. One night, he awoke to the sound of Duke growling, his hackles raised. He sat up in bed, his heart pounding. The room was bathed in an eerie, cold light. He followed Duke's gaze to the doorway, and there for the first time he saw her. A translucent figure shimmering in the darkness. She wore a long flowing gown, her features obscured by the dim light, but he knew with every fiber of his being that it was Elena. Terror threatened to overwhelm him, but something kept him rooted to the spot. Was it fear, or was it something else, something akin to hope? He watched as the figure drifted closer, her form becoming clearer, more defined. He could make out the curve of her cheek, the fall of her hair, the faint outline of her familiar smile. "Elena," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. The figure paused, her head tilting as if listening. Then with a heartbreaking slowness she raised her hand, reaching out to him. He wanted to run, to hide, to escape the overwhelming wave of emotion that threatened to drown him. But something in her eyes, something lost and yearning, held him captive. He found himself reaching back, his fingers trembling as they stretched toward hers. Just as their fingertips were about to touch, Duke lunged, barking ferociously. The figure flinched, dissolving into motes of light that swirled and danced before vanishing completely. Jacob gasped, his hand closing on empty air. He looked down at Duke, who was now whimpering, his tail tucked between his legs. "What was that, boy?" Jacob whispered, his voice shaking. Was it her? Was it really her? He didn't have an answer. He wasn't even sure he wanted one. Part of him, a small, desperate part, clung to the hope that it was Elena, that she was trying to reach out to him from beyond the grave. But another part, the rational part, the part that was still anchored to reality, screamed at him to run, to get out, to escape this house that had become a prison of his own making. He spent the next few days poring over old books, researching local legends, desperate for any explanation for the events that were unfolding around him. He learned about the history of Willow Creek, about a tragedy that had befallen the previous owners. A young couple who had drowned in the creek, their bodies never recovered. Some whispered that their spirits still haunted the land, seeking solace, or perhaps revenge. Jacob dismissed these stories as folklore, the ramblings of superstitious minds. But the seeds of doubt had been sown. He couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor's presence, or whatever it was that haunted Willow Creek, was connected to the creek itself, to the watery depths that had claimed so many lives. He decided to visit the creek, to see if he could feel anything, any lingering energy that might offer a clue to the mystery. As he approached the water's edge, a cold wind swept through the willows, their branches swaying as if in warning. He felt a chill run down his spine, a sense of unease that settled deep in his bones. He returned to the house, his mind awhirl with questions, his heart heavy with dread. He knew he couldn't ignore the strange happenings any longer. He had to do something, but what? He looked at Duke, who was watching him with worried eyes. He reached out, stroking the dog's head. "Don't worry, boy," he said, his voice resolute. "I won't let anything happen to you. I'll protect you, I promise." He reinforced the locks, boarded up the windows, and brought Duke's bed into his room, seeking comfort in the dog's presence. He knew it was futile, that whatever haunted Willow Creek was beyond the reach of locks and bolts. But he had to do something, anything, to regain a sense of control over his life, over his sanity. That night, a storm raged, the wind howling like a banshee, the rain lashing against the windows like 1,000 tiny fists. Jacob lay awake, listening to the storm's fury, his heart pounding in his chest. Suddenly the lights flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness. Duke whined, snuggling closer to Jacob. Then he heard it, a soft scratching sound at the bedroom door. He held his breath, listening intently. The scratching came again, more insistent this time. He reached for the lamp on his bedside table, his hand trembling. As he flicked the switch, the door creaked open, slowly, deliberately. He stared into the darkness, his heart in his throat, waiting for whatever lurked beyond the threshold to reveal itself. The storm raged for 3 days. Jacob remained a prisoner in his own home, the eerie occurrences escalating. He saw the figure flitting past doorways, heard whispers in the dead of night, felt cold spots in the air, the temperature plummeting unnaturally. Duke remained by his side, a source of comfort and protection, his growls a warning against the unseen menace. Then, the storm subsided. The sun broke through, casting a golden light. The eerie occurrences ceased. The whispers faded into silence. Willow Creek was bathed in deceptive tranquility. Life settled into an uneasy routine. Jacob continued to see fleeting shadows, hear unexplained noises, but the terror subsided, replaced by sorrow and mystery. He never knew if the figure was Eleanor, if she was trying to reach out to warn him or offer comfort in his grief. He lived with the uncertainty, the questions unanswered, the mystery of Willow Creek etched into his soul. Every night, as he locked the workshop and walked back to the house, he felt watched, something lingering in the shadows, forever bound to Willow Creek.